information. Ready? Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This lecture is being recorded for the GSE's YouTube channel. The recording will be archived and accessible there later this week. While the camera and microphone are oriented toward the front of the room, please do be aware that the microphone will catch ambient sound, including your questions or comments, potentially. So you are, in a sense, being recorded in that way. So bear that in mind. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Jongsung Kim, who is here as a visiting scholar. He is a doctoral candidate in social studies education at the University of Hiroshima in Japan. Originally from South Korea, Jongsung focuses on the teaching of controversial history in elementary school classrooms in Korea and in Japan. He is spending this academic year as a visiting scholar working with Beth Rubin on projects related to civic education. Today's presentation, Teaching Korean-Japanese History Through Authentic Communication, is about an action research project in which Japanese and South Korean elementary school students worked together to create a better textbook account of the controversial history between Japan and Korea. So, welcome.
Thank you for kind introduction, Dr. Justice. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jongsung Kim from Hiroshima University. Before I start my presentation, I would like to talk about myself a little bit. Who am I? When I was a kid, I loved world history and transportation. Social studies was my favorite subject at all the time. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be a diplomat, actually. But fate was cruel. I couldn't make the diplomat school because my Korean SAT score was not good enough to enter into it. So I chose my second best option, to be an elementary school teacher. So as an elementary school teacher, I still love the social studies. And whenever I have opportunity to do open class, I chose social studies. But at the time, I had one problem. Whenever I teach about the history, Korean-Japanese history, Korean students was very angry and upset against Japan because Korea was colonized by Japan at some point. Actually, the aim of social studies education to educate citizens to contribute world, including world peace, but my actual lesson went the opposite way. So I decided to study social studies education more deeply. And I'm a PhD candidate of Hiroshima University, and my specialty, of course, social studies education. And now I'm a visiting scholar, and now I'm lucky enough to be here as a visiting scholar. I would like to express my gratitude to host my host to Dr. Rubin and Dr. Justice. So it is more easier to understand my title. My title is Teaching Korean-Japanese History Through Authentic Communication. It is a project making a better textbook of Sino-Japanese word and Russo-Japanese word. I would say that it is a journey to discover how South Korean students and Japanese students developed mutual understanding. So I would like to give a background information about this presentation. Actually, President Obama visited Japan this May. He went to Japan to attend G7 summit, actually. But not only the venue of the G7 summit, he visited one more city in Japan. Do you remember where he visited? Yeah.
Hiroshima?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, he visited Hiroshima. Actually, I heard that it was very controversial even in the United States to visit him to Hiroshima, but for visit him to Hiroshima. Actually, he wanted to deliver a message to remove nuclear weapon in the world. However, many Japanese want him to apologize for using nuclear weapon in 1945. Actually, Japan and the United States are not the only countries who have opinions to this event. Of course, Korea had opinion to that. Actually, at the time, 1945, there were 100,000 Koreans there, and they were sacrificed by nuclear attack. And Korean government wanted President Obama to mourn for them. Like this, to international events, there are multiple perspectives, that's for sure. So it is not surprising that Korean-Japanese history also have multiple history. However, the textbook of especially social studies textbook just stick to their discourse. Sino-Japanese War and Russo-Japanese War will be the best example because in Japanese textbook, these wars are depicted as history of victory because Japan won those two wars. However, in Korean textbook, the two wars are depicted as history of damage. Actually, these two wars happened in Korean territory, even though there is no Korean name in this word. But when we think about the textbook situation in both countries, the whole situation got worse. In Japan, every social studies textbook are censored by Japanese government. Actually, Korean case is worse. There is only one textbook that is made by Korean. So it is not surprising that they just stick to their each country's discourse. And also teachers follow textbook as kind of Bible. So textbook is almost same as lesson. That means students only know their own discourse, even though there are multiple perspectives to Korean-Japanese history. In terms of that, these two groups in Japan, they try to adapt perspective consciousness, and they should be rated highly, I think. They try to relativize one's view through encountering others' view, and also they try to understand Korean-Japanese history based on East Asia scale, which is broader than only one country's viewpoint. However, it is hard to say that those two research achieved mutual understanding. Actually, the two groups adapted others' view into the classrooms, and they facilitated intrapersonal communication, which is good. Actually, which is much better than only knowing the others' discourse. However, the understanding from intrapersonal communication ended up inside of oneself, and it is not delivered to other agents who need to share the result. Actually, the agents of mutual understanding of Korean-Japanese history are Korean students and Japanese students. If they do only intrapersonal communication, they may have an opportunity to do meta recognition, but there is no opportunity to exchange each other's viewpoints. That is why we need authentic communication, which is just real communication to exchange each other's viewpoints. So, how students can do authentic communication, and how we can approve its effect. So I practiced action research to prove the possibility of Korean-Japanese history education based on authentic communication like this. Design a project based on hypothesis and practicing and testing the hypothesis. So I set two hypotheses for this action research. The first one is authentic communication that I told. This concept actually came from international education. In international education, sometimes students only know about others' opinions, such as Korea is in Far East or Japanese love sushi like that. But in this stage, I would say there is no communication at all. The next stage is intrapersonal communication. Adapting others' view into classroom and then recognize, analyze, criticize it can facilitate intrapersonal communication, but as I said earlier, it is not enough to achieve mutual understanding. So that's why I add the last step, suggest. Suggest one's view to others. and it can make possible to do authentic communication. I can call these 4 steps as the 4 steps for authentic communication. However, if I suggest my opinion to others based on this 1st step, and also others suggest based on this 1st step, and it can possible it can make it possible to communicate between us. The second hypothesis is textbook as medium. Then with what can students communicate each other? Actually, this research is based on between 2 countries that use different languages. So communication with documents will be effective. Among the documents, I chose textbook. As I told earlier, those in South Korea and Japan, the textbooks are made by government. So it is possible to say that the textbooks are experts and nations' documents. By deconstructing and reconstructing textbook means that give back the leadership of learning from experts to students and from nation to citizen. So that's why I chose textbook as a medium of communication. So based on the 2 hypotheses, I designed this project. This project consists of 4 rounds by turns. I practiced lesson in Seoul, in Korea, and Hiroshima, in Japan. I contacted 2 schools through my colleague and former colleague and my advisor. After I explained the aim and outline of project, they understand. They permitted for me to do the action research. And South Korean students was 17, and in Hiroshima there were 33 students. As a teacher and as a facilitator, I come and go between South Korea and Japan. So this is the flow of the project. Firstly, South Korean students learned how Japanese textbook depict the 2 words, and then they recognize the textbook's view toward the 2 words, and then they analyze and criticize it. And based on the work that they did, and they suggest the better textbook to Japan. And Japanese students try to find out why South Korean students suggested this kind of textbook. And based on 4 steps, they suggest the opinions to South Korean students to make the textbook better. And like this, the 4 steps went on in this research. Okay, the data and data analysis. To prove the hypothesis of this action research, I collected the lesson videos and my teaching reflection and textbooks made by South Korean and Japanese students and pre-post survey. Firstly, I utilized the discourse analysis. Textbooks made by students are located as discourse, and the lesson that I practiced are located as the context of discourse. And also I utilize a rubric to judge students' understanding level. And at pre-survey, I asked for students to write down what you think about Sino-Japan Spur and Russo-Japan Spur. And I practiced 2 times post-survey. At the time, I asked the students to write down freely what you learned, felt, on read thoughts through this project. And these essays are cut into chunk of meanings, and each chunk of meanings are analyzed based on this rubric. This rubric, as you can see, there are 2 big categories. One category is understanding others as knowledge, and the other one is mutual understanding between others and oneself. Understanding others as knowledge covers no communication and interpersonal communication, and mutual understanding between others and oneself covers authentic communication. The parts students only wrote about facts is no communication. The part students wrote about recognition of others' view and meta-recognition to one's view is intrapersonal communication. And the parts that students wrote about awareness of communication process and recognizing others as partners of communication is authentic communication. Also, to upgrade the reliability of this research, which means to do meta recognition of my identity as Korean, I designed the project and analyzed the result of project with Japanese graduate students together. Okay, here is, I explained the big picture of my action research. Is there any questions so far? Yeah.
Did the students already have opinions of these wars before these lessons?
Yes.
Or is this, okay.
Yeah, they already have some knowledge. Actually, I would want to use the word knowledge. They also have opinion too, but they usually wrote about their knowledge at pre-survey level.
And how old?
Oh, they were sixth graders. Yes. Is there any question? Good. Okay. Then let's see how they deconstruct and reconstruct discourse. The first round's goal is South Korean students can know the contents of Sino-Japanese word and Russo-Japanese word in Japanese textbook and recognize the viewpoint, analyze, criticize the viewpoint, and suggest a better textbook Japanese students. Japanese textbook is kind of orthodox. There is a reason of the word, result, reason of the word, and result, and what is the meaning of the words. South Korean students compared this Japanese textbook and their Korean textbook, and they expressed these kind of opinions. Actually, so many parts in Korean Korean textbooks, so many parts are utilized to depict how Korea tried to keep their country. But there is no those kind of contents in Japanese textbooks, so they thought that this one should be included in the new textbook. And there is, in Japanese textbook, there is a contest that Togoe Hachiro, who is a war hero, who is depicted as war hero, but Korean students thought that he's not a war hero for Korean, and he's actually the kind of some enemy for Korea. And also, in Japanese textbooks, exactly say that the victory of the words gave hope to many Asian countries that suffered under many Western countries. And South Korean students thought that, wait, actually you guys colonized Korea. Actually you guys are kind of similar to Western countries. And based on this discussion, they suggested this new textbook. With this new textbook, Korean students tried to deliver this message. You did bad things. And we got a lot of damages. And I would say that this textbook tried to identify problems with Japanese textbook depicting the words as history of victory. Because for Korean students, this just doesn't make sense at all. So they put these new contents. For example, the first one is Joseon people try to keep their country, as I said earlier. And also, they want to say that Joseon received a lot of damage from Japan, China, and Russia. And the third one was also very interesting because in Korean textbook, the Empress Myeongsung is kind of very important person. And actually, she was killed by Japan because she tried to use Russian power to contain Japan at that time. And Japan killed her because to sustain their power in Korean Peninsula. And so Korean students thought that they need, Japan should know Japan killed Empress Myeongsung to get power over Russia in Joseon at that time. And also, they wanted to add this contents. Japan's victory did not give any hope to Joseon people. So how Japanese students react to this new textbook? the goal and the whole structure procedure is kind of similar with the first round. And Japanese students try to deliver this message, but you are not the only victim, and we are not the only perpetrator. I would say that they try to expand the concept of victim and perpetrator. Let's see each by each. Two Joseon people try to keep their country. They thought that, okay, if that is fact, we should know. There's kind of agreement. And two, Joseon received a lot of damage from Japan, China, and Russia. And it was very fascinating for me because they thought that, but I can recognize that Joseon people got a lot of damage, but Japanese, Chinese, and Russians were also damaged by the war. So let's write, war itself is bad. And the third one is Japan killed Empress Myeongsong to get power over Russia in Joseon, and then they thought that, yeah, we need to know, but the word kill is kind of strong, so let's change to assassinate. And Japan's victory did not give hope to Joseon people, and they agreed a little bit, but they thought that Japan is not the only country to try to exert its power in Joseon. So, in terms of colonization, Japan is different. Also, in terms of colonization, Japan is different from European countries because of its scale. Because they only colonized some Asian countries, so they thought that they are different from Western countries who colonized so many countries in Africa or Asia, like that. So the third round went on, and it is a suggestion to Japanese students. And Korean students react like this. Okay, let's talk about victim and perpetrator again. And I would say that South Korean students thought that Japan should be responsible for Japan's damage. There are many parts reached agreement with each other, like this. But this part, war itself is bad, is not. South Korean students thought that that's not their intention. So please read it again. And Korean students was also very sensitive to these two words, kill and assassinate. For them, Empress Myeongsong was not assassinated because they thought that assassinated is kind of some kill someone very secretly, but they thought that Empress Myeongsong were killed publicly, and actually her body was burnt in the palace. Actually, students know those kind of facts, and then maybe that's why they have anger and they are upset against Japan. And also, they thought that Japan anyway colonized Joseon, so maybe Japan needs to be responsible for that. These 2 points are not reached an agreement yet. So lastly, how Japanese students reacted the Korean students' opinion is, I understand you, but they still have something to say. For example, there are many parts agreed. However, also, even they thought that their argument is kind of wrong. The scale is kind of ridiculous, even for them. So they decide to follow Korean's suggestion. However, they don't want to yield this part. They thought that the word itself is bad because all the damages generated by the words. So they don't want to yield this position. So there are many parts. So I can say that there are many parts that reached agreements, but there are still some parts they need to talk. But for action research, I should finish this level for analyzing. If I do more and I have more data to analyze, so I didn't want that. Yeah, practically, I finished this level. So, based on those practice, how can students develop their mutual understanding? To find out the overall trend of understanding change, I have followed the understanding change, these three levels: the pre-survey and the first post-survey and the second post-survey. Knowledge in this table means understanding others as knowledge, and the mutual means mutual understanding between others and oneself. Then you saw at the rubric before. Okay, actually, at the first round, first post-survey, only 41% of South Korean students and 21% of Japanese students showed mutual understanding each other. However, at second round, 72% of South Korean students and then 71% of Japanese students showed the mutual understanding based on the results of analysis based on the rubric. So I would say that practicing authentic communication multiple times helps to develop the mutual understanding between others and oneself. And the second one is about the analysis of knowledge. Even their knowledge is not just for express, I know this part and I have opinion like that. And even this knowledge show that at least meta-recognition was facilitated by intrapersonal communication, this amount. And the left one is kind of just knowledge, but they have more details instead of that because they learn anyway. So this part that I need to figure out why they just stick to this level. That is my task to research more. So in more detailed analysis, usually the first and second round, students tend to show meta-recognition of knowledge. And the third and fourth round, they tend to show awakening possibilities of communication. And the process, students tend to show meta-recognition of viewpoints. As a result of authentic communication, they showed understanding collision and awareness of communication partner. Let's see more detail. The first one, the meta-recognition of knowledge. A Korean student 19 wrote that, I found out that Japan is not the only country which is responsible for Sino-Japanese War and Russo-Japanese War. She realized that Japan is the only country which is bad, but she realized that by Japanese suggestion that actually China and Russia also tried to exert their power in Korean Peninsula, so she could do meta-recognition of her knowledge. I would say that the understanding Sino-Japanese War and Russo-Japanese War she could understand Sino-Japanese War and Russo-Japanese War based on broader knowledge. And the second one is meta-recognition of viewpoint. Japanese student 21 wrote that, I had thought that the wars are the problems of only the countries who fought each other. However, I found out that my thought is wrong. The knowing about others' opinion helps to recognize others' viewpoints, and it also helps to do meta-recognition of one's viewpoints. And then the third one is students could aware the possibilities of communication. For example, student 8 wrote like this. I thought that Japanese friends would get angry or not accept it at all when they see the textbook that we made. However, Japanese friends accepted. I think that my bias towards Japan was broken. The two meta-recognition that I mentioned connected to awakening possibilities of communication. This whole process, as you can see, that matches the 4 steps of authentic communication. However, there are some understanding collision. For example, Japanese student 37 wrote like this. I was angry about the expression, only Japan is responsible for the wars. So I would say that there was a rousing antipathy by problematizing Korean-Japanese history based on authentic communication. However, when to pursue mutual understanding, we need to exchange each other's view. Sometimes others' view can be different from ours. So to pursue mutual understanding, sometimes it is not inevitable to rouse antipathy. To overcome it in a good way is rather than important just escaping than understanding collision, I think. And the last one is awareness of communication partners. Korean students 21 said that, I felt that we had a real conversation with Japanese students by revising the Japanese textbook and suggesting it to Japanese students. By all this process, students could break the boundary known as nation and giving authentic communication opportunities to individuals. In other words, they only knew that Japan is something, but now they know Japanese students know something. There is no more nation. There is a people, individuals inside of that. They could recognize it, and also it is connected to encounter diversity, and also I would say that students understand more mutually and more deeply. So what kind of implications can we get? I set two implications from my action research. The first one is history education based on constructivism. Students have learned the history that is created by experts, and they learn how it is created. But by doing action research, they can recognize, they can construct their own version of history between South Korean students and Japanese students. So by experiencing this kind of activities, they could find their new role as history makers, not only history learners. So in terms of that, I can say that we need this kind of more activities for history education based on constructivism. The second one is history education as global citizenship education. By doing authentic communication, they can know other countries' viewpoints and other countries' students' viewpoints, and they could understand mutually, and that means they can relativize their own discourse, and then they can know there are many multiple perspectives in the world. So using authentic communication in history education is a good alternative to reform national history discourse. However, this kind of practice is not easy to practice, to run. They have to go and back between South Korea and Japan, and they need to speak bilingual, like as me, Korean and Japanese. So it is not easy. However, I would like to call this limitation as necessary. These days, in this era, we need teacher education that cover this kind of. We need teacher education that responds to globalization. So I think that we need to fix the aim of teacher education more to fit to global era. So maybe pre-service, also in-service teachers should be educated to try this kind of activities, and also the systemic support is needed to do that. Also for that, we need to break down the silent premise, for example, such as Korean history education by Koreans and Japanese history education by Japanese. Actually, these are references that I refer to. There are many Japanese. And yeah, actually, as I told you earlier, I want to be a diplomat. But somehow I felt that I made my dream come true, because to pursue mutual understanding between countries, especially that have high tension, is a very good, a very important job. One of the very important jobs as a diplomat. So I would like to stick to my research, and then as a non-governmental diplomat, and I want to express these activities with the teachers in Japan and Korea, and not only Japan and Korea, but also who are interested in this action research in the world. Yeah, thank you for listening. Actually, it's very, yeah, it's kind of short. It's okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That was so great. What an appropriate subject matter given what's transpired in the last week. So we'll take some questions.
Sure.
Thank you. That was a very interesting presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. My question is, what type of evidence would you look for to see if they're transferring this authentic communication to new contentious issues with different narratives?
Can you read it one more time?
Yeah, so if you expanded this project, because I don't think you addressed it here in the participatory action research, but if you wanted to see if they were taking this process of authentic communication and using it in other settings on other issues, how would you assess that?
What's that?
How would you look? What evidence would you look for that they were doing that? Any thoughts?
I'm not sure if I understand your question or not, and I would like to expand this action research as a data design-based research. Actually, that's why I came here to learn the design-based research with my host, Beth Rubin. Actually, she's the expertise of that research method, and that research method is that collaborated research with researcher and the practitioner together. So I plan to collect some Korean students, Korean teachers and Japanese teachers together who are interested in this research, and then discuss what kind of things that we need to do this kind of research. For example, Sino-Japanese war in Russo-Japanese is one, and also comfort woman issue can be the other one. And actually, there are so many controversial issues between South Korea and Japan. Actually, I already practiced the next action research that is Tokto Takeshima one, and there is very small island between South Korea and Japan, and they are that island has very complicating story between South Korea and Japan. So I practiced like that, and so those kind of controversial issues can come up with from South Korean teachers and Japanese teachers, and then I'm as a facilitator of this action research, and we can collaborate together, and that's my plan. Is this the answer that you wanted to?
I think I was wondering more, have you thought about how you would see if the students were doing this themselves outside of your research?
Outside of my research.
You know, so are they then finding an issue by themselves and engaging in authentic communication?
Actually, the example that I did earlier than this would be good. The earlier one was just about Korea. The South Korean students analyzed how Japanese textbook depict about Korea. But there is no controversial issue at that time. But they picked up the territorial issues, and they picked up the colonization. Japan should be responsible for their attack to Korea. So like that, they come up with those kind of things. Actually, those two things are very main controversial issue between South Korea and Japan. So that's why they could come up with that, because they already knew based on the media or their parents or their textbook also said those kind of things.
Thank you.
Another question? Well, that's a good question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So how do you envision being able to show teachers this idea and have them use this idea?
Actually, that's a very good question. I have to plan that. Actually, I didn't finish my dissertation yet. That's my next step, actually. But I'm sure that there are many teachers who think this tension between South Korea and Japan should be resolved. So, yeah, maybe I'm not sure yet, but maybe homepage or those the Japanese Academic Association and Korean Academic Social Studies Association have very good relationship with the teachers at school. So that using that connection can be one way, I guess.
I wanted to ask a question about maybe the potential overlap to social psychology with respect to perspective taking. So have you thought about that?
Social psychology.
Social psychology has an entire area, and I know very little about this, perspective taking, trying to think about something from another person's point of view, right? So it seems to me that that's a necessary but not sufficient condition for this, right? So I was wondering if you'd looked at that literature, or if there would be a nice way to connect that to this work.
Yeah.
It was just an idea that I had when you were talking.
Yeah, actually, I put some literatures here, but it's in Japanese.
Yeah, my Japanese is not the greatest. It's my fifth language.
Yeah, I referred to that. Actually, in some parts, the social psychology is very effective to this research. Actually, the authentic communication idea also came from international education, but also came from social psychology, I think. So, knowing only to do metaphor recognition is not good enough for pursuing mutual communication. Actually, that part came from social psychology. Yeah.
Right, so that could be part of it, right?
Yeah.
That could be part of it,
Exactly.
and then the perspective taking could help, and maybe that's part of the interpersonal.
Right.
Interpersonal.
Actually, this part also, that I argue that perspective consciousness is not good enough is also that came from social psychology.
And what is the age group that you're studying? I'm sorry.
Sixth graders,
Right.
and they are 12 years old.
So there's a really nice, of course, tie to the work that is going on in Clark's group with thinking about, sort of epistemic frames, right? In terms of viewing data. Like, students think that what they read in a book is fact, quote unquote fact, right? And that whole idea is a really problematic one for a number of reasons. So something sprung to mind while you were speaking, which is that I believe Macmillan Education had to do an entire reprint of a textbook because they talked about African Americans not as slaves but as workers in a most recent version of their of a social studies textbook, right? I mean, this is blatantly wrong and revising history, right? And so the thing is that as time passes, these texts become ever more important in terms of the veracity that they exhibit or demonstrate. So I'm just thinking about, the developmental and epistemic features associated with one understanding, a text, its role, the perspective of the text writer, etc. And if you wanted to comment that, or if we could have a discussion about that, because that's very much, I think, a big part of what you're talking about here.
Yeah, actually, from textbook, I want to pick up one issue that, especially in international education, that's I'm interested in. Many social studies textbooks just mention their country's name. For example, America attacked Japan, like this. So many students say that America is bad. But not all Americans did like that. So there are, the thing that I want to argue is that the agent of doing something should not be country. They should think, not nation, they should think more detailed thing. They want to just generalize everything based using the word, the nation's name. So maybe that is one reason that South Korean students have is upset against Japan, because they saw so many sentences from their textbook. Japan attacked something, and then Japan did bad thing, like Japan, 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 and then they, how can I say, they are instilled those kind of emotion to Japan. So I think that that is one point that we think about when we talk about textbook or something.
Good.
In the United States, social studies within the school curriculum is really kind of an unusual subject in that it's an amalgamation or combination of different disciplines. It's history and it's geography, and there's a little bit of economics and political science. Is the school curriculum organized in the same way in Japan and in Korea?
Yeah.
Is social studies the same sort of
same.
mishmash?
Yeah, actually, yeah, it's very mixed until middle school level. But from high school level, they have history, world history, geography, like kind of more separated. Since the South Korea and Japan also, there was a time that ruled by American military around 1945. So they adapted so many. Actually, there is very funny history a lot. Actually, in Korea, that top chief of military came from Colorado. So they decided to adapt Colorado social studies education. So they start to learn about desert, even though there is no desert in Korea. Yeah, those kind of things happen. But based on that, we have the same kind of subject matter system as United States. But yeah, at especially elementary level, they are more integrated.
Do you think the different disciplines make it more difficult to engage students in more sophisticated analysis of history?
I think that that's not problem of discipline separated or integrated. That's the teaching style, I think. Even only history, if teachers think that they need economic situation and political situation to explain that history event, it can be more social studies thing. Even though they teach only history, so it's not the problem of the separate and integrate, and it's more about teaching style, I think. And I prefer to teach more integrated.
As you point out, this project required international travel.
Yes.
It's very expensive.
Yes.
And I agree that the authentic communication seems key, but do you think you could do some version of this that's less expensive? Perhaps asking next year's students to look at the textbook as it was revised, so they're kind of imagining talking to their peers? Or do you really think it has to be live to accomplish these changes?
Actually, since this is authentic communication, I pursue that real communication. The process is the key, I think. To see the results of the authentic communication can be also good, but that is just intrapersonal communication for me. So the process